In 2023, Nigeria's total foreign trade reached 71.88 trillion naira, an increase of 37.2% when compared to the 52.38 trillion naira recorded by the year 2022, according to the National Bureau of Statistics report. Nigeria recorded a meager trade surplus in a region of about 45 billion naira, with imports at 35.917 trillion naira and exports at 35.962 trillion naira. In terms of value of trade with economic regions across the globe, Asia came top, slightly edging Europe, and the Americas came third. So this morning, Oladipo Ajayi, head fixed income and FX, Chapel Hill Denham Securities Limited, joins me to talk about this. Thank you so much, Mr. Ajayi, for joining us on the show.
Thank you very much, Lekon, for having me on this morning.
Okay, so Nigeria's total foreign trade, as I said earlier, went over 71 trillion naira, reflecting a significant increase of 37.2%. When you compare that to what we saw or tracked in 2022, there was a slight increase. Now, though we have always cited economic challenges inhibiting exports than imports, however, the balance seems even when we look at the numbers, and fairly so, I must say. But then, what would you say fueled the increase that we saw last year?
Well, I think basically 2023 was a peculiar year. It was a year where there was change in government, and we saw harmonization of the exchange window. And so what it simply means currently at that particular point in time means that and dollar moved from about 450 naira at the exchange window to about 750 thereabouts. And over time, throughout the year, we saw naira actually depreciating further, even to the end of the year, around 990 naira. These are some of the things that actually pushed the value upside, because when you look at it from this perspective, imagine at the beginning of the year you actually had a trade of $1 billion. At the beginning of last year, it will be about $450 billion. But at the end of last year, the same dollar value, but different naira valuation. So at the end of the year, it would be about $990 billion. So at the end of the day, we would have seen it as a huge and massive jump from where we used to be and where we are currently. So I don't think it's a function of the fact that there was maybe a better or an aggressive export on our side that actually led to that huge jump. But I will actually ascribe it to the depreciation of the currency than actually more business activities.
Yeah, okay, so looking at all the factors that you have placed on the table now, we saw impressive growth, no doubt, maybe not as much as one would have expected. But Nigeria, recorded a modest trade surplus of about 45 billion naira in 2023. Is that indicative of maybe a sustainable economic recovery, or does it highlight a deeper issue when we talk about dependency of foreign goods?
Well, for me, I think we'll be better off now, Leko, if we look at it from this perspective now. Nigeria is an oil-producing nation, and but we are also oil importing nations, because after exporting crude oil, we ended up actually bringing in refined products. But what we have seen since sometimes at the beginning of the year, we started seeing more like a major shift from that direction into another direction, which simply means that we are now looking inward to actually patronize a local producer rather than actually pushing for importation. Since sometimes at the middle of this year, we've been actually buying the diesel locally, aviation for locally, and some other products like that we're actually buying locally. And just some days ago, I was seeing an agreement signed between Dangote Refinery and also the market, which also lent credence to the fact that we will see a better trade surplus in the year 2024 compared to what we actually saw last year. And I feel that in 2025 will even be more massive, considering that it simply means that we can now export this product without any reason to actually look at importing the refined product back to the country. So it means that we can actually maintain our export capacity while actually reducing our import bill. So I think these are some of
Oladipo,
the
that's
things
just,
that.
sorry to butt in, but that's just petrol. You know, conversations around the world is to move away from fossil fuel to renewable energy. So if we are banking on that market to drive probably revenue, GDP, and all whatnots, I mean, if the global shift is away from that source of energy, do you think that the market will be viable and returns will be beneficial at the long run, 2025, 2026, upwards?
Leko, I agree with you to some extent, but if we are moving from fossil fuel, Leko, I can boldly say that this is not a short-term project. The global world is moving from fossil fuel. I can tell you that it will still take another 20 years before you actually
why did you say that? Why did you say to take that long?
Okay, let me give you an example. When the crisis started in the Eurozone, when Ukraine and Russia crisis were happening, do you understand that even the Eurozone went back to coal as a means of generating power for that zone, even most especially during the winter season? So it comes to tell you that these are some of the things that we say on paper, and I agree with you that you see, when we are talking about moving from something, it's not an abstract or an immediate movement. It's something that you gradually ease yourself into, and that's exactly what most of these global economies are actually doing. What they are trying to do is to actually ease themselves into it, and I can tell you that it's not something that happens overnight. It's something that happens for a period of time. And okay, now let's look at South Africa. South Africa is actually big on coal. And at the time, they're already talking about divesting or moving from coal to other aspect of energy. But it will shock you that they have gone back to coal aggressively as well now, because they also see it as, let us also capitalize on this currently while we can actually enjoy it. And I agree with you to a great extent that the global world is moving and we need to move in that direction. But I can tell you that we also need to maximize it as the opportunity still very much available. It's not something that will happen in 1 or 2 or 3 years. And that's one of the reasons why I said that we'll enjoy it at least in the next 5 years before we start seeing the full impact of the global shift around that.
Okay, well, still talking about imports, and to put it in context, about 35.917 trillion naira is what Nigeria imported in terms of the value of what it imported in 2023. So in light of that, significant increase in imports, shouldn't Nigeria, probably reconsider its approach when we talk about tariffs and excise duties, or probably trade policies, to see how we can reshape that part and make Nigeria less import dependent and even export more within that mix?
You see, one thing about export for Nigeria, I think Nigeria should look more like an exporting country than an importing country. And the reason why I'm saying this is I'm looking at it from perspective of the currency. Because an economy where their currency is very cheap should be good for exportation rather than importation. And one of the problems we've been facing is because we have more like a weak currency. So anything we are bringing to this country looks extremely very, very expensive. And I think that's why the country needs to actually capitalize on this current regime to actually take advantage of this. Because whatever you are exporting to outside the country looks extremely very cheap. I'll give you an example, or let's look at even the stock market. What's happening in the stock market? If you look at it at a time, if you actually bring in $1 to this economy, and let's say you are buying a GT bank, and a $1 at 450 naira, and you are buying GT bank, let's say GT bank at 45 naira, you will only be able to buy 10 units of GT bank. But if you are bringing the same $1 to this country now at 1,700, and you are buying GT bank at 45 naira, I don't need to tell you that you buy almost 4 times of what you used to buy. So it tells you that Nigeria is actually very cheap for anyone that actually wants to patronize us. But the issue is that what are we doing as a country to leverage this? What are we doing to actually encourage exportation? Because we've seen a situation whereby most companies that are into exportation find it very difficult because of the bureaucracy at the port and what they need to do with the port authority. And these are some of the challenges that some businesses are actually having. And for us to actually do better, it means that we need to remove this bureaucracy for us to capitalize on what's currently happening in the country and actually be able to generate more efforts and actually reduce the impact on our economy.
So invariably, local companies right now, or local manufacturers right now, or the local industry, so to speak, does not have that capacity. Even if we say we want to increase the volume of export, that was around, I think 35.962 trillion naira. So to even improve on that value, right now we do not have that capacity, because we've even seen, manufacturers come out to say that taxes are still high, multiple taxes are there, borrowing costs are high, the fact that the benchmark rates are also skyrocketing. Of course, the MPC has to do that because it wants to slow down the economy, and policies are not really favorable, for local industries to thrive. Everything stops at the table of government as we speak. But there doesn't seem as though even the government is willing to do anything to help the local industry.
Yes, I think I would say government is looking at doing something. And also, when you look at the tax reform bill, it tells you to a great extent that government is not sleeping on these things. And sometimes last month, the government also came up with more like a policy where they start giving tax exemption to some importations. And one of the reasons why they are doing that is that some of those things are input to production. And when you give more like a tax rebate to some of those products, it helps this company to actually be able to produce at a cheaper rate and also be able to compete with their international mates as well. And also, if you leave that as well, and I think another thing that the government also needs to do is that we need to do more of developmental finance in this regard. Government needs to actually now look at targeted industry. If government is looking at actually help the manufacturing sector, you can actually create a fund that actually can help these people access to funds at a cheaper rate than what they would have gotten from a commercial bank. Because sincerely speaking, just like what you have actually alluded to, it's very difficult for you to borrow at 34% and be able to produce at a cheaper rate. And you are now competing with other companies in the world, companies that are actually borrowing at single digits. And also, they also have social infrastructure, they have whatever it takes to actually be able to produce at a better speed, the machineries and everything, they have it. And these are some of the people that you're actually competing with. But the advantage that some of the manufacturers in Nigeria have is what I have just mentioned earlier on, is the weak currency. And that's one of the reasons why you see that Chinese yuan will never appreciate aggressively at any particular point in time. Sometimes the government ensure and decide to intentionally devalue their currency so as to continue to make their product cheap globally. And I'm not actually surprised when you look at the data and when you look at imports to exports that we have that we did in the year 2023 with China. I think we actually our import bill to China was about 6.6 trillion, and our exports to them is just about something north of 800 billion. So it tells you that things are very cheap there because of their currency. A Chinese government will not allow their currency to actually appreciate aggressively. So we have that currently working for us. What we just need to do as a country now, the government needs to now support manufacturing companies. The government needs to support people that actually operate in the trade sector as well. The government needs to support people that actually operate in the agricultural sector. Because if these people can actually get funds at a cheaper rate, they will be able to produce at a cheaper rate and their product will be more competitive as well in the global.
I even think that's where I think that's even where the problem is, because the talks have always been around, having a diversified economy. At some point, they said Nigeria's economy was fully diversified. We talked about targeted industries when it comes to investment focus for the Nigerian government a while ago. At some point, the ICT was said to be, one greenhorn. There have been, talks around the non-oil sector being a real boomer when it comes to investments and returns. But focus have always been on oil and agriculture. Even the agri sector has been a huge struggle, I must say. So if we were to look at other sectors of the economy, other industries, which areas do you think are probably, give some sort of appreciable ROI in this regard, if we're going to tune our investments to those areas?
Leko, I will pick mining as my number one on the list because the mining sector is more like a new gold that's actually springing up. And the government needs to actually give full support to this industry. Because even if you have checked what is happening in the GDP, you would have seen that the contribution to GDP has improved in the last 2 years, and it's a function of what is happening in that industry. So, and again, now we all say this a lot, that Africa, we actually endow with natural resources, but is converting that natural resources to output has been the problem. And I think that has been one of the problems of our mining sector. And the government needs to actually work, needs to come on board with a very attractive policy that will actually bring in funds. Because you can have resources, if you don't have funds to actually tap some of those resources, it will become the problem. Because that's exactly the problem we're having in the oil and gas sector. It's not that we don't have huge deposits of oil in our reserve, but the problem is that we are not getting new funding into that sector that will further develop and help in the exploration of some of these products. And that's exactly the same thing that's happening in the mining sector. So I think that the government needs to just find a way to actually, just like what you are doing in the oil and gas sector, you need to create a bill or an act that will actually help that sector to develop, and also ensure that the sector investor are actually protected in that industry, because it's not an industry where after people have invested heavily into something, the government will just come in with a policy that will actually further tweak and change everything that's actually that's currently on the table. So the government needs to work around that aggressively. And also, I will still back down on agricultural sector. I'm telling you, we are not maximizing it to full capacity. We are not fully enjoying it. I understand the part of ICT. You understand? For ICT, it's sometimes it's more like a service in most times, and so it's a service you render and you enjoy a form of income that comes or that accrues to the economy in that regard. Okay. So, but when you look at agriculture is one of the things that Nigeria has an advantage over. But part of the problem we'll be having in this country is that we have insecurity issue. We have situation whereby our farmers are not well trained. We have a situation with seedling. And do you know, sometimes when a farmer plants a seed of, let's say, cocoa in Nigeria, and another country also plant a seed of cocoa, there's every tendency that the other country will get a better yield than what we are getting in this country. And it's because of the quality of the yield that we're actually using. And again, we also need to move into more like a mechanized farming. These guys, they need funding. What is government doing in this regard? These guys, they need to be protected in terms of security. What is government doing in this regard? Because what this will do to us is that it will not only boost inflow of FX revenue into the country, it will also cater for our need. Some of the things that will go up offshore for to actually import to this country. These are some of the things that we can actually plant locally. And that's one of the reasons why I will still pick agriculture as one of my pick.
Okay, so interestingly, let me quickly bring this before we wrap up, Oladipo. Despite the growing advocacy for, increased intra-Africa trade, the total trade between, Africa's biggest economy and its fellow African countries stood at 4.609 trillion naira in 2023. But then we see the numbers on the rise when, Nigeria or Africa trades with other continents. Now, isn't that a big shame? When you look at the bogus talks around implementing the AFC, FTA agreement, we've had that talk go on for a couple of years now. But then by the time you look at the indices and you look at the trade volume between Africa, Nigeria, and other African countries, as against what we see, with other continents of the world, we see that it's a huge, huge low. So what are we talking about when we keep talking about the agreements, but then we are not really doing anything to upscale that volume?
When we see data like this, it's actually pointing to the fact that we only talk and we don't walk the talk. And sincerely speaking, it's actually abysmal. That you look at it and see the whole total trade among Nigeria and its counterparts in Africa is just a bit over 4 trillion. And in a year, and we've been talking about HAFTA since 2018, and as of 2023, nothing tangible has been done in that regard. In 2022, they came up with a Pan-African payment and settlement system. They launched that in 2022, and when it did that, we thought, wow, it seems that we are moving very fast. So it simply means that in no time you can buy something in Uganda and pay with naira easily. You don't need to convert through dollar and something like that. It was making a lot of sense. But when you see data like this, it tells us that we are not doing enough among ourselves. It tells us that we are helping other countries to grow their continent, and that we are not doing more.
So what do we need to what do we need to do aside conversations and forums and summits and meetings? Just about 1 minute. What can Africa do?
But I think the data we are talking about was a data for last year, and I think when we look at what's happening this year, it could have been better. Sometimes last 2 weeks, we saw the first shipment under that agreement from Nigeria to Kenya, and it was done by a company called Lucky Fiber, one of the subsidiary company of the Tolerant Group. And I think that these are some of the things we need to see more. When we go for AU meeting, what do we discuss? We don't discuss things only about security and all those things. Trade is very, very key. When you trade aggressively among ourselves, some of the problems that we are facing as Africans would actually disappear, because we can't continue to actually trade with other countries offshore when we are not doing as much as that in our local. What we are doing, Lekon, is that we are contracting employment to other continents.
Wow.
When we are suffering in Africa.
Wow.
Because every product you actually import from any other continent, you have actually exported employment. So we need to actually look at this from that perspective. First, Africa first, just like what that has to be the slogan.
Okay.
Africa first. It means that whatever you want to sell as a nation, Africa counterpart must be first in whatever you are thinking.
Of course, that's what this intro does anyway. Africa first, Nigeria to the world, Africa to the world, basically. But then we hope that that conversation can scale beyond, Nigeria, all over the continent, and resonates, across our consciousness to see how we can improve our market value, so to speak, and ecosystem. Oladipo Ajayi, head fixed income and FX, Chapel Hill Denham Securities Limited. It was nice talking to you. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us.
Thank you very much, Lekon, for having me this morning.
Of course.